and welcome. In a very significant development, Indian Defence Minister Rajnath Singh addressed Parliament on Thursday on border standoff with China in Ladakh region. In focus tonight, we talk about the significance of this disengagement process, which as we speak has already begun, attributed to India's sustained level of dialogue and engagement, whether you talk about diplomatically or militarily. And the other big story on the show tonight, the government's tough posturing or tough talk on Twitter and other microblogging sites for giving space to anti-India and provocative content. On the show tonight, we also talk about Centre's non-negotiable message of follow the law of land and constitution or face action. I'm Sakal Bhatt, and on News Night, first up, the headlines. Disengagement along LAC at both banks of Pangong So Lake begins in full earnest. Defence Minister Rajnath Singh tells Parliament not an inch of land has been lost to China. Defence Minister says China to move back to Finger 8, moratorium on patrolling in some areas for the time being. US President Joe Biden speaks to President Xi Jinping for the first time, expresses concerns about China's assertive action in the region, Beijing's economic practices and human rights record. Joe Biden affirms his priority of preserving a free and open Indo-Pacific. Prime Minister Trudeau speaks to Prime Minister Modi about Canada's need for made-in-India vaccines. Prime Minister assures Canadian Prime Minister of India's support for Canada's vaccination efforts. India becomes fastest country in the world to administer COVID-19 vaccines. Nearly 7 million people vaccinated in just 26 days. Number of deaths due to COVID-19 reported from 17 states and union territories in the last 24 hours. No deaths reported. India gives a stern message to Twitter and other social media platforms. IT Minister Ravi Shankar Prasad tells global IT giants you're free to do business and make money, but will have to follow the Indian Constitution. IT Minister tells Parliament strict action will be taken if social media is misused to spread fake news and fuel violence. Prime Minister Narendra Modi asserts nation first mantra is the bedrock of his government. Pays tribute to Deen Dayal Upadhyay on his death anniversary. Says New India is realizing his vision through the Self-Reliant India campaign. And Trump impeachment trial continues in United States Senate. Graphic footage of the attack on the U.S. Capitol on January 6th released as evidence. Video shows Romney, Pence fleeing as Capitol under attack. People from all walks of life join protests in Myanmar. Policemen, civil servants, doctors demonstrate demanding release of Aung San Suu Kyi. Meanwhile, US President Joe Biden imposes new sanctions against the military government. Britain also mulls stronger sanctions. And now for the top story in detail. Now, in a major development, India and China have reached an agreement on disengagement at Pangong So in Ladakh. On Thursday, the Indian Defence Minister Rajnath Singh gave details of the breakthrough after a protracted standoff and several rounds of talks between military commanders and diplomats of both sides. Also speaking on the disengagement, Indian Defence Minister attributed this breakthrough to sustained level of talks with China, leading to this agreement on disengagement on the north and south banks of Pangong So Lake. This further means India-China will remove forward deployments in a phased, coordinated manner. Here's more.
बातचीत के लिए हमारी स्ट्रेटजी तथा अप्रोच माननीय प्रधानमंत्री जी के इस दिशा निर्देश पर आधारित है कि हम अपनी 1 इंच जमीन भी किसी और को नहीं लेने देंगे। हमारे दृढ़ संकल्प का ही यह फल है कि हम समझौते की स्थिति पर पहुंच गए हैं।
Defence Minister Rajnath Singh stating in Parliament on Thursday that an agreement has been reached with the Chinese side for disengagement in the Pangong Lake area. Speaking in the Rajya Sabha in the first half of the day, he shared a detailed account of what has been achieved.
पैंगोंग लेक एरिया में चीन के साथ डिसएंगेजमेंट का जो समझौता हुआ है, उसके अनुसार दोनों पक्ष फॉरवर्ड डिप्लॉयमेंट को फेज्ड, कोऑर्डिनेटेड एंड वेरीफाइड मैनर में हटाएंगे। चीन अपनी सेना की टुकड़ियों को नॉर्थ बैंक में फिंगर 8 के पूरब की दिशा की तरफ रखेगा और इसी तरह भारत भी अपनी सेना की टुकड़ियों को फिंगर 3 के पास अपने परमानेंट बेस धन सिंह थापा पोस्ट पर रखेगा। इसी तरह की कार्रवाई साउथ बैंक एरिया में भी दोनों पक्षों द्वारा की जाएगी।
These are mutual and reciprocal steps, and any structures that had been built by both sides since April of 2020 in both North and South Bank area will be removed. It has also been agreed to have a temporary moratorium on military activities by both sides in the North Bank, including patrolling to the traditional areas. Patrolling will be resumed only when both sides reach an agreement in diplomatic and military talks that would be held subsequently.
मेरी अभी तक की जानकारी के अनुसार जो समझौता हुआ है उसका क्रियान्वयन अभी तक, मैं फिर से दोहरा, अभी तक ठीक तरीके से हो रहा है। अभी तक दोनों तरफ से सारी बख्तरबंद गाड़ियां अपने परमानेंट बेस पर वापस जा चुकी हैं, ये हमको जानकारी मिली।
Defence Minister Rajnath Singh said that diplomatic and military engagement with the Chinese side continued despite the actions by China. Talks are based on 3 key principles. Both sides should strictly respect and observe the LAC. Neither side should attempt to alter the status quo unilaterally, and all agreements and understandings between the two sides must be fully abided by in their entirety. Rajnath Singh assured Parliament that India has not conceded anything to China during talks at various levels. The meeting of senior commanders will be held within 48 hours after the complete disengagement in the Pangong Lake area to address and resolve all other remaining issues.
फ्रिक्शन क्षेत्रों में डिसएंगेजमेंट के लिए भारत का यह मत है कि 2020 की फॉरवर्ड डिप्लॉयमेंट जो एक दूसरे के बहुत नजदीक है, वे दूर हो जाएं और दोनों सेनाएं वापस अपनी अपनी अस्थायी एवं मान्य चौकियों पर लौट जाएं। मैं सदन को यह भी जानकारी देना चाहता हूं कि अभी भी LAC पर डिप्लॉयमेंट तथा पेट्रोलिंग के बारे में कुछ आउटस्टैंडिंग इश्यूज बचे हैं। इन पर हमारा ध्यान आगे की बातचीत में रहेगा। दोनों पक्ष इस बात पर सहमत हैं कि बाइलेटरल एग्रीमेंट्स तथा प्रोटोकॉल के तहत पूर्ण डिसएंगेजमेंट जल्द से जल्द कर लिया जाए। यह सहमति बनी है।
Defence Minister hailed the bravery of the armed forces even in the face of harsh adverse climatic conditions. He said their grit and determination to safeguard India's borders is unwavering. Rajnath Singh recalled the sacrifices made by brave soldiers, describing them as the foundation of this disengagement at Pangong Tso Lake.
With this statement in both houses of the parliament, the defence minister has silenced the opposition that has been time and again cornering the government on the Chinese standoff in the eastern Ladakh region. With cameraman Smruti Ranjan Mahapatra in Delhi, this is Vishal Baristo, DD News.
All right, so since mid-May, the Chinese side attempted to transgress the LAC in several areas of the western sector of the India-China border area in Ladakh. Now, these attempts were met with an appropriate response coming from the Indian side. In order to address the issues arising from such attempts, the two sides have engaged in discussions through established military and diplomatic channels. Now, since September 2020, military and diplomatic officials of both sides, that is India and China, have met several times to work out a mutually acceptable solution for the disengagement process, which is finally kicked off. And now let's take a look at a quick explainer. We're talking about China's misadventure to alter status quo and the timeline, the talks timeline. Let's first talk about what really happened, what China did, which led to what has happened today. Now, in the month of April, May 2020, there were attempts to alter status quo along the line of actual control in western sector in Ladakh. This is the Chinese transgression which began then. And then towards mid-May, the Chinese side attempted the transgression more further. Finally, the tensions heightened on 16th of June, heightening of tensions between two sides when the Chinese troops killed 20 Indian soldiers, 20 soldiers were martyred. Then on 17th of June, MEA, our Minister of External Affairs, had a telephonic conversation with his Chinese counterpart. And now let's take a look at a quick timeline. How many times did two sides engaged? There were 9 meetings between senior commanders level from both sides, from India side and Chinese side. These are the important dates. This is a date line, and look at the consistency with which India engaged with China. The first talks happened on 6th of June, then on 22nd of June, the third round of talks on 30th June, then next round of talks, the fourth round on 14th of July, which was further followed on 2nd of August and subsequently on 21st of September. Then there was another round of talks between the two sides at the senior commanders level on 12th of October. The next one on 6th of November, and finally on 24th of January. That's the recent one in 2021. Besides those 9 meetings or level of talks between the senior commanders level, there were 6 meetings of the WMCC. What is WMCC? WMCC is basically the working mechanism for consultation and coordination on India-China. This was what was a task force sort of thing that was made. And 24th of June, 10th of July, then 24th of July, 20th of August, 30th of September and 18th of December 2020, the talks happened. And finally on 4th of September 2020, our Raksha Mantri Rajnath Singh met his defense counterpart General Wang Fenghe in Moscow. Basically, this was on the sidelines of the Shanghai Cooperation Summit, remember, in Moscow. And it was immediately followed on the very event, that is on the sidelines of the SCO on 10th of September 2020, MEA met Chinese counterpart Wang Yi again on the sidelines of the meeting of the foreign ministers of SCO. And finally, all this, India's efforts, attempts militarily and diplomatically, finally led to both sides reaching a consensus on an agreement vis-a-vis disengagement of troops at Galwan. In focus tonight, we talk about India-China disengage at Pangong So. And to do so, we're very glad to have on Newsnight tonight Ambassador Pinak Chakravarti, former senior diplomat and Secretary MEA, for joining us on the show, and also Professor Harsh Pant, Distinguished Fellow ORF. Thank you very much, both of you gentlemen, for joining us on News. And I would like to quickly start with Ambassador Chakravarti. Ambassador Chakravarti, there was a detailed intervention by our Defence Minister Raksha Mantri in the Parliament today, where he talked in detail extensively about how this disengagement of troops is going to actually be implemented on ground in more structured and phased manner. But just to put in perspective, China on mat and how India managed to actually reach to this level from both channels, putting pressure diplomatically and militarily. What do you attribute this to?
Well, firstly, I think the first announcement came from Beijing, from the military spokesman there. And then, of course, I suppose it was expected that our defense minister would also make a statement, and since the parliament is in session, that would have been in the parliament, which he did. Well, I think we all know that over 9 months and over 9 rounds of discussions, and both at various levels, diplomatic and military, that have taken place. And why we have reached this situation of disengagement today, which is a very good sign, actually. Nobody has the stomach for hostilities and war at this stage, when everybody is struggling with COVID and the economic issues. But I think it is also important to note that there is a new administration in the USA, which of President Joe Biden, a very old and a seasoned player in international politics, who knows the scene very well. And I think there has been signaling that has taken place from Washington also.
Okay.
And I think overall, when you take it, when you look at the situation, I think there has been realization perhaps also on the Chinese side that this is a no-win situation. And so they have tried their best to do their salami slicing, etc. And this agreement, for example, also leaves certain issues that are unanswered, but hopefully they will be answered in the next few weeks or so. For example, no patrolling, for example, which is not the status quo, by the way, which was the status quo earlier in April 2019 when this whole push from China came, military push really. And I think India's stand has been very, very clear that, Chinese have been repeatedly saying, even their ambassador recently has written a piece and in response to Dr. Jaishankar, our external affairs minister, who laid out certain points for normalization, the Beijing reacted by saying that, don't link the border issue with other issues. But that's not our position, and there is no way we are going to accept that.
Okay.
So I think that the positions taken by India, the international ambience that is developing, and also various other issues, COVID, economics, etc., has, I think, sent signals everywhere, including Beijing, that they cannot win this kind of battle of attrition. So hence I think typically of the Chinese, they take time and they try to wear you down. We are all aware of that. And I think India stood her ground, and I think it is a result of a very, very, very strong position that India has taken on the border. Because it was really a stab in the back by the Chinese. It was unexpected. And why would they break so many years of peace and tranquility, which had led to fairly normal relations with China? So I think the Chinese were trying to browbeat various countries in Southeast Asia, etc. And they tried their hand with India. But India is a different kettle of fish. And they have now discovered.
So the browbeating, okay, let me take, yes, Ambassador Chakravarti, let me take this point to Professor Pant. You agree, and what according to you has finally led China this realization at the end of 8-9 months that we better back off, otherwise we will be in serious trouble? Do you think there's been a growing international trouble? Do you think this is international isolation, and there is also some Washington, the change of guard in Washington also somewhere responsible for this?
See, in all such cases, a number of factors matter, but I think what is in a bilateral dynamic between China and India, India's position has been consistent and very, very robust. That unless certain fundamentals are acceded to, India is not going to back down. And I think when the crisis started, it started on a note where perhaps China thought there was an opportunity, geopolitical, geoeconomic, everyone, there was a COVID crisis raging, India, perhaps people in Beijing felt India is vulnerable, let's take advantage of that. And what they have learned, it seems to have learned, is that India will not back down from what it believes to be its core and vital interests. And that is what has happened. So what you have seen over the last few months is a sustained attempt at a very calibrated kind of a strategy across all domains, economic, diplomatic, military, and even as negotiations were continuing, India was making it very clear that we cannot go back to status quo ante that existed before May 2020 unless China accepts the very logic that border issue and the wider bilateral relationship is intricately linked. And I think what we have seen today is China is more isolated perhaps than it has ever been. China is also facing pressure from the Biden administration. The talk between Mr. Biden and the Chinese leader has not gone down very well. There has been it has taken a very robust response continuing from Mr. Trump. So clearly China believes at some level that it has to play its cards right with India. Now, of course, what has happened today is a start of a long drawn out process, but I think what has fundamentally happened is that India has given the message to the Chinese that it will not back down and it will use all its resources to make sure that India's vital interests are protected, and that's what Indian diplomacy and Indian military forces have done.
And Ambassador Chakravarti, what message does it send across globally vis-a-vis India's positioning, vis-a-vis how India stood its stand?
I think this is a very important message that is sent out not just globally, but particularly in Asia, where China has been flexing its muscles in South China Sea and with Taiwan and Hong Kong, that China respects, and China realizes that that power when China wants to exercise military power, it has to be resisted and by everybody. And India has actually shown the way that this is how it is to be done. That you cannot back down when your core interests and national interests are threatened. So I think this is a very, very strong message that will go out to Asia in general and to the countries in Asia, Japan, South Korea, ASEAN, and all the others who have continuing problems with Chinese expansionism, as we call it. So I think this is a very, very important message that goes out, that it is not a cakewalk for China. And I think the global mood has changed. And so China will have to take that into account. And I believe it has taken that into account, because this is a signal, the disengagement at the lake, the Pangong Tso Lake, is the first signal that this is something that China has realized that it has to compromise. And I mean, there was nothing to compromise actually. China had to just go back to its original sort of position before it started, making all these transgressions and massing troops, etc., and all that. Because India has shown that if you want to mass troops, we can. If you want to bring in frontline aircraft, we can too. And I think China does realize that in a conflict situation, it is not going to be so easy taking on India.
Right. Ambassador Chakravarti, I'm just sorry I'm interrupting you here because we need to move on also. But before we move on to the other aspect, the other top trending international story, let me quickly talk about this also and get our guest's view on this as well. US President Joe Biden, in fact, spoke with his Chinese counterpart, by the way, Xi Jinping, on Wednesday evening. And this was the first call between the two leaders since Biden assumed office on January 20th. Now, this is what transpired on the phone call between the two. President Biden underscored his fundamental concerns about Beijing's coercive and unfair economic practices, crackdown in Hong Kong, human rights abuses in Xinjiang, including towards Taiwan. President Biden affirmed his priorities of protecting the American people's security, prosperity, health and way of life, and also preserving a free and open Indo-Pacific. The two leaders also exchanged views on countering the COVID-19 pandemic and the shared challenges of global health security. President Biden committed he said the U.S. is committed to pursuing practical, results-oriented engagements when it advances the interests of the American people and those of their allies. Also, U.S. President Joe Biden on Wednesday in the Pentagon said in a review did a review of the strategy towards China, looking at pivotal areas which includes intelligence, technology, and Washington's military footprints in the region.
We need to take on the dangers and opportunities of emerging technologies, enhance our capabilities in cyberspace, ensure that we are positioned to lead a new era of competition from the deep sea to outer space. And we need to meet the growing challenges posed by China to keep peace and defend our interests in the Indo-Pacific and globally.
Also, a U.S. official speaking on condition of anonymity said that a 15-member task force would be created at the Pentagon to review the strategy and present recommendations within 4 months. Earlier this week, two U.S. Two U.S. carrier groups conducted these joint exercises in the South China Sea as China accused the United States of damaging peace and stability. In fact, the U.S. has contested China's extensive territorial claims in the region, accusing it of militarizing the South China Sea and also trying to intimidate neighbors such as Malaysia, Philippines, Vietnam, which have actually claims that overlap with the China's in-source-rich area. Let me quickly go across to Ambassador Chakrabarti and also Professor Harsh Pant with us. What do you make, Ambassador Chakrabarti? Very quickly, now U.S. is talking tough. It's a tough talk by U.S. on China, and looking at the Pentagon release, what do you think? Are we looking at a changed template, how U.S. is now going to deal with China? And is this what you mean when you also mentioned earlier, in response to my first question, that what is happening in Washington is also somewhere down the line impacting how China is now dealing with the neighbors, including India?
I think the readout from Washington on what happened during the conversation between President Joe Biden and President Xi Jinping is an indication and a signal that the Biden administration is going to continue a policy that will challenge China, and it's going to challenge it on various scores like human rights, like trade policy, but it would also seek, I think, which has not been said, cooperation on climate change, for example. I think Beijing is realizing that the Joe Biden administration, which it had thought will reverse a lot of policies of President Trump, is not going to happen. There'll be more nuancing of that policy, but it is quite clear that the USA has marked out China as the #1 strategic challenger, and to that extent, it is going to deal with it as a strategic challenger. And the task force that has been created in the Pentagon is a sign, is a very, very clear sign that they are going to develop options that will further this policy goal, which has been laid down by President Biden. So I think there is no doubt about that this policy is going ahead, and the task force is going to suggest options. And China, I think, is also, and Beijing is also, I think, conscious of the fact that, and I believe that China's, in the next few weeks and months, many Chinese actions will be conciliatory, in the sense that it will send messages to the rest of the world, and particularly to Washington. And because I think this disengagement is also a signal to Washington, because the US has talked about China's sort of unacceptable policy of threatening its neighbors and trying to coerce them. It's also talked about predatory and mercantile trade policies that put pressure, for example, the debt burdens that they have put on various countries through the BRI loans, etc. So I think that kind of messaging is coming out of Washington, and I think Beijing is listening, and listening very carefully.
Beijing is listening and listening very carefully. Professor Pant, how do you look at U.S. Talking like a big brother? You mend your ways or else you've had it. I mean, look at the way Biden-Pentagon readout actually, it specifically talks about coercive, unfair economic practices. Final word, is this going to be a big blow when it comes to China's typical expansionism strategy, considering India has also managed to do, India has walked the talk. India says that we have not conceded even a bit of our land, and you better push back.
I think more and more countries are realizing that you have to stand up to Chinese aggression. And I think the consensus that at one point existed in America about China, that you just have to bring China into the international fold to make it just like another Western country, that consensus has broken down. And that means that all kinds of instrumentalities will be now used across domains, whether you're looking at economic and trade, technology sector, whether you're looking at military and diplomatic sector, which will be used to make sure that China's expansionism is stopped and China's rise is well managed now by the West. And India has shown that even if one is weaker in comparative terms, you can still stand up to a country like China and make sure that your vital interests are protected. And I think that's the message that has gone out. And what Mr. Biden is doing is continuing with the approach that Mr. Trump took. So I think at some point, Beijing perhaps hoped that a change in administration would give it more options. But it is now realizing that the door is closing, that there is a greater consensus, perhaps at any point in time in history in America today against China, and that is building up across, not only in America, but across the West, that Chinese predatory practices, economic, military, and diplomatic have to be challenged. Okay. And India is part of that larger landscape where perhaps India is one of those countries that has shown the way.
All right. On that note, thank you very much, Harsh Pant, Professor Harsh Pant, Distinguished Fellow ORF, and also Ambassador Pinak Chakravarti, former Secretary MEA and India's High Commissioner to Bangladesh, for joining us on the show. Thank you, both of you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Meanwhile, staying with more international news, impeachment prosecutors at Donald Trump's Senate trial aired some terrifying, never-before-seen footage of last month's Capitol Hill riots. They argue that the riots were deliberately incited by former President Donald Trump. This is the footage that paved way for Trump's impeachment, which depicts how ugly and unruly January 6th got when a mob stormed U.S. Capitol after Trump reportedly told a rally near the White House that his failure to win re-election was due to vote rigging. Remember, the ensuing mayhem left at least 5 people dead. Here's the latest.
The impeachment trial gathered steam on Wednesday, with Democratic lawmakers laying out their evidence that former President Donald Trump incited an insurrection by exhorting thousands of supporters to march on the Capitol last month. The impeachment managers used footage of the events of January 6, linking them to speeches of Trump to bolster their case. House managers prosecuting the case also said Trump had planted the seeds for the riot by encouraging violence and making false claims the election was stolen long before January 6.
You've seen all the evidence so far, and this is clear. On January 6th, President Trump left everyone in this Capitol for dead.
What's also clear is what Donald Trump, our commander-in-chief, did in those initial hours to protect us. Nothing. Not a thing. He could have commanded them to leave, but he didn't. The first critical hour and a half of this bloody attack, Donald Trump tweeted his rally speech and did nothing else.
If anyone ever had a doubt as to his focus that day, it was not to defend us, it was not to console us, it was to praise and sympathize and commiserate with the rampaging mob. It was to continue to act as inciter-in-chief, not commander-in-chief. When he incited insurrection on January 6th, he broke that oath. He violated that duty. And that's why we're here today.
Democrats aimed to show how Donald Trump laid the groundwork for the deadly attack on the U.S. Capitol by falsely claiming the election was stolen. Screenshots from pro-Trump websites were shown as evidence that radicals in his support base were emboldened by his rhetoric to pre-plan the attack. They stated that Trump made multiple false assertions that he lost the election because of widespread fraud. Recalling the attack tearfully, Pennsylvania Congresswoman Madeleine Dean referred to Trump as a desperate president.
At 2:30, I heard that terrifying banging on House chamber doors. For the first time in more than 200 years, the seat of our government was ransacked on our watch.
Trump's defense argued that the trial is politically motivated and that free speech is protected by the First Amendment. Fast-tracking the impeachment, party leaders have agreed to move on a tight schedule that could lead to a vote on conviction or acquittal by early next week. Trump is the first U.S. president to be impeached twice after leaving office. He's just the third president in U.S. history to be impeached. Newsnight Desk, DD India.
Well, as Myanmar explodes further, Biden's new sanctions have now become the talking point. According to the U.S. president, the new sanctions will allow his administration to actually freeze U.S. assets that benefit Myanmar's military leaders, while maintaining support for healthcare programs, civil society groups, and other areas that benefit the country's people. Meanwhile, large crowds demonstrating against the military takeover in Myanmar again defied ban on protest earlier on Wednesday, even after security raided the headquarters of the political party of the ousted leader, Aung San Suu Kyi.
I again call on the Burmese military to immediately release the democratic political leaders and activists and they're now detained, including Aung San Suu Kyi, and she is, and also Win Mint, the president. The military must relinquish power it seized and demonstrate respect for the will of the people of Burma, as expressed in their November 8th election.
US President Joe Biden ordering new sanctions against Myanmar.
And we're also going to impose strong export controls. We're freezing U.S. assets that benefit the Burmese government while maintaining our support for health care, civil society groups, and other areas that benefit the people of Burma directly.
Biden's announcement comes on the back of growing international pressure on the military government in Myanmar. 2 days back, New Zealand suspended political and military ties with the country. Meanwhile, protests in the country continued for the 6th day. Fueled by youngsters, the protests have a unique color and flavor. A group of Myanmar shamans joined demonstrations wearing their costumes. Shirtless bodybuilders protested outside the Chinese embassy with profanity-laden messages written across their bodies, denouncing the military government. Protesters have accused Beijing of supporting the military junta despite Chinese denials. Meanwhile, 25-year-old musician Wai Mo Ong led an army of ukuleles as they played revolutionary hymns advocating political change, representing Myanmar's self-proclaimed Generation Z, a generation of youth which has come of age during the country's years of democratic development. Demonstrators protested outside the United Nations office in Naypyidaw.
The main reason of protesting in front of UN office is that we want the UN to know and enact some actions with regards to this kind of military dictatorship. We also want the whole world to know what the military dictatorship is doing to our country, not only through our local media channels, but also through international media around the world by protesting in front of UN office.
United Nations Human Rights Commission is set to consider a resolution on Friday to condemn the military coup in Myanmar and demand urgent access to the country. It has been drafted by Britain and the European Union. Newsnight Desk, DD India.
In other news, Prime Minister Narendra Modi received a telephone call from Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau on Wednesday. The Canadian Prime Minister informed Prime Minister Modi about Canada's requirements of made-in-India COVID-19 vaccines. Prime Minister Modi assured to support Canada's vaccination efforts, expressing his appreciation of Prime Minister Modi's leadership. Canadian Prime Minister Trudeau said that if the world managed to conquer COVID-19, it would be significantly because of India's tremendous pharmaceutical capacity and Prime Minister Modi's leadership in sharing this capacity with the world. Prime Minister Modi thanked Canada Prime Minister for his sentiments. The two leaders also reiterated the common perspective shared by India and Canada on many important geopolitical issues. Well, the other big story back home, the message for all social media platforms from India's Union Information and Technology Minister Ravi Shankar Prasad: come and work in India, but follow law of land, making a strong case for zero tolerance towards misusing social media platforms against nation. Centred on Thursday made it clear that it does respect the freedom of speech and expression and also the right of the citizens to criticize, but anything that tantamounts to anti-national will not be tolerated. Here's more.
सोशल मीडिया का दुरुपयोग अगर हिंसा, फेक न्यूज, वैमनस्य बढ़ाने के लिए किया जाएगा तो कार्रवाई होगी, ये हम बहुत विनम्रता से कहना चाहते हैं.
Stern warning to Twitter from India's IT minister from the floor of the upper house of Indian Parliament. Follow warning or leave. The Secretary of India's Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology recently held an online meeting with representatives of Twitter to resolve content-related issues to farmer rallies. India demanded Twitter remove over 1,100 accounts allegedly linked to the January 26 Delhi protests, while Twitter failed to act upon it. And on Thursday, while slamming Twitter for allowing provocative content on its platform, This issue was vociferously raised during question hour and the IT minister put his foot down, sending a clear message.
वॉशिंगटन के कैपिटल हिल पर जब रैंसैकिंग होती है, पुलिस को कार्रवाई करना पड़ता है, तो कुछ ये माइक्रो ब्लॉगिंग कंपनियां उसके साथ खड़ी हो जाती हैं। और जब यहां पर लाल किले पर हमला होता है, जो भारत की गरिमा का प्रतीक है, तो उसके विरोध में खड़ी हो जाती है। ये डबल स्टैंडर्ड नहीं चलेगा, ये सारी कंपनियां जान लें।
Without mincing any word, Ravi Shankar Prasad said, if anyone tries to misuse social media and manipulate it to influence elections, non-compliance to rules and laws will draw tough action. Prasad added, government has made a platform to bust misinformation and all fake news items will be flagged by the system.
अगर सोशल मीडिया का दुरुपयोग करके कोई चुनाव को भ्रष्टाचार से प्रभावित करने की कोशिश करेगा तो सख्त कार्रवाई की जाएगी, यह भी हम कहना चाहते हैं। एक फेक न्यूज को बस्ट करने का हमने प्लेटफॉर्म बनाया हुआ है और जो फेक न्यूज डालते हैं तुरंत उसका करेक्शन भी यहीं आ जाता है। तो आज इस सदन के पटल से, चाहे वो ट्विटर हो, चाहे वो फेसबुक हो, चाहे वो लिंक्डइन हो या कोई हो या व्हाट्सएप हो, मैं विनम्रता से आग्रह करूंगा, भारत में आप काम करिए, आपके करोड़ों फॉलोअर हैं, हम उसका सम्मान करते हैं, पैसे भी कमाइए, लेकिन भारत के संविधान को आपको पालन करना होगा।
Union Minister Prasad's statement comes in backdrop of the recent row over Twitter, where the government asked the social media giant to remove tweets which it considers fake and anti-India farm laws agitation. Earlier, several union ministers have made their displeasure with Twitter public and even backed Made in India app coup. Ravi Shankar Prasad again hit out at the double standards of some microblogging forums on treating the events at the US Capitol Hill and at the Red Fort on Republic Day. Meanwhile, the Indian government has taken Twitter head on and has drawn a line. Compliance and adherence to Indian constitution and laws is a must. With inputs from Neeraj Singh and Rajesh Raj, Newsnight Desk, DD India.
So, the other talking point on Newsnight in Focus, Centre talking tough on Twitter. And to do so, we're joined by CEO, MyGov India, Abhishek Singh with us. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. Very, very strong words from Ravi Shankar Prasad today in Indian Parliament. But my question to you would be, when was the last time when we heard from Twitter? What is their response now? Are they now going to pull up their socks and do exactly what is expected from them? I mean, their compliance to what Government of India expects from them.
As was mentioned by Honorable Minister today and as was spelled out in the press release issued by Ministry of Electronics and IT, there was a meeting which was held with the Secretary IT and the officials of Twitter, and it was made clear to Twitter officials, the global compliance officials, that law passed by Parliament of India and 69A, under which the notice has been issued to Twitter for violation of the norms of the legal position, which leads to incitement of violence. This law is violated, and as against that, as per 69A, they have to block those accounts. So if Twitter doesn't comply that, it will be a violation of Indian laws, and they can't take refuge in the garb of Twitter rules. Twitter rules are not sovereign rules. The sovereign rules under which Twitter functions in India is the laws which are passed by Parliament of India, the IT Act of India, and 69A is part of that. So that was made very clear to them that they need to comply with it. They have assured that they will ensure compliance.
Mr. Singh, the IT Secretary has also earlier expressed deep disappointment in which the company, the Twitter, had actually unwillingly, I'm just quoting that bit, I'm sure you know about it already, unwillingly, grudgingly and with great delay complied with only parts of the order. This is part of that statement released by the government. This selective defense mechanism by Twitter, which we saw earlier, and do you think now we've managed to bring them back on mat after Honorable Minister's intervention in the Parliament? He was replying to a question in Rajya Sabha, but I think government has now clearly drawn the line, and I think this message is loud and clear. What happens next if the Twitter doesn't comply?
It is very loud and clear. See, India is a democratic country which has a supremacy of law, and as per law, Twitter is, if they are operating in India, they are supposed to comply with the laws of India. If they have any grievance with regard to any orders which are passed on 69A, there is a judicial mechanism which is defined to which they can file their grievance. But till such time, any competent court, any competent authority finds merit in their argument, they are supposed to comply, and any non-compliance will mean defiance, which will attract penal attractions as per the provisions of the law. So provision 693, the subclause 3 of 69A, clearly mentions what are the penal consequences. It may lead to arrest, it may lead to punishment up to 7 years of imprisonment, it may lead to other actions that are normally taken against anyone who doesn't abide by the law of the land.
What is the larger messaging, Mr. Singh, if I may ask, because the final, basically Twitter has to now walk the talk. It is for them to do what is expected and the sites that, the list that has been given to them. But after Ravi Shankar Prasad's intervention in the parliament today, what do you think is the larger message, not only to Twitter, but other micro blogging sites? Why I'm asking you this, putting in perspective the double speak of Twitter, what happened in Capitol Hill, and then what happened on 26 January in India.
See, the message is very clear. Like anybody who is doing business in India, we welcome them with open arms. We extend all due provisions of benefits that are available as per law. We are a democratic country. Everybody has a right to speech. But at the same time, the Constitution of India lays down what does not come under the freedom of speech, what are the reasonable restrictions that can be imposed. And the general premise of the law is that your fundamental rights stop where my rights begin. So every citizen has an equal freedom of right, and it cannot be that any microblogging site or any social media platform, if it is used to incite violence, if it is used to cause damage to public property, if it is used to result in incidents which can affect the security of the nation, which can result in loss of lives, the law will take its own course. We cannot sit mute spectators to that. Absolutely. And Twitter and other platforms, they do conform to the laws in the United States. If any Indian company goes and violates these laws in the United States, they would haul them up immediately. Absolutely. So what applies to companies in the US, what applies to those companies in India as per the Indian law will have to be complied with, will have to apply, that will remain supreme. So that is very clear. It has been made clear to them in as many words. The legal provisions are there, and they will have to take action as per the orders passed by the competent authority under the due provisions of the law.
Before we wrap up, Mr. Singh, is there any deadline or timeline given to Twitter to respond to this?
Yesterday they had assured that they had probably some misunderstanding without what the law means and whether they can comply 94% or 95%, but they need to comply it with ASAP and report compliance to the designated authority under the 69A.
All right, so there are no questions asked there. They have to comply to the order in totality. Thank you very much, Abhishek Singh, CEO mygov.india, for joining us on Newsnight. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Let's move on and talk about the other big story of the day. Prime Minister Modi paying floral tributes to party ideologue Deen Dayal Upadhyay on his 53rd death anniversary. Prime Minister recalled Deen Dayal Upadhyay's contributions of nation building, self-reliant India. Here's more.
राष्ट्र भक्ति ले हृदय में, राष्ट्र भक्ति ले हृदय में, हो खड़ा यदि देश, राष्ट्र भक्ति ले हृदय में, हो खड़ा यदि देश सारा, संकटों पर मात कर, संकटों पर मात कर, यह राष्ट्र विजयी हो हमारा, यह राष्ट्र विजयी हो हमारा।
Prime Minister Narendra Modi paying a poetic tribute to Pandit Deen Dayal Upadhyay on his 53rd death anniversary. PM underlined that Deen Dayal Upadhyay's ideals are still relevant and are an inspiration for all. He reiterated that BJP has always kept national policy as paramount in politics and stated that the government always keeps the welfare of the masses in mind when it takes any decision.
ये हमारी विचारधारा है कि हमें राजनीति का पाठ राष्ट्र नीति की भाषा में पढ़ाया जाता है। हमारी राजनीति में भी राष्ट्र नीति सर्वोपरि है।
Criticizing opposition parties for corruption and dynastic politics, Prime Minister asserted that BJP rises above party lines when it comes to serving the nation and recognizing the contributions of others towards the country.
हमारे राजनीतिक दल हो सकते हैं, हमारे विचार अलग-अलग हो सकते हैं, हम चुनाव में पूरी शक्ति से एक दूसरे के खिलाफ लड़ते हैं, पर इसका मतलब ये नहीं कि हम अपने राजनीतिक विरोधी का सम्मान न करें। आपने देखा होगा प्रणब मुखर्जी साहब, हमें भारत रत्न देने में गर्व हुआ।
Highlighting work done on to promote use of technology, Prime Minister stressed that transformational changes are taking place in the field of infrastructure which will make lives of citizens easier. He called on party workers to use technology to share the achievements of the government as well as the positive approach of the party. Focusing on Atmanirbhar Bharat, Prime Minister said Pandit Deen Dayal Upadhyay stressed on the need to build an India that is self-reliant not just in agriculture but also in defence and weaponry. Today, India is witnessing defence corridors being made. Made in India, weapons and fighter jets like Tejas. He added that Deen Dayal Upadhyay's belief that only a strong nation can contribute to build a better world is a reality today.
जब हमारा देश समर्थ होगा, तभी तो हम दुनिया की सेवा कर पाएंगे, एकात्म मानव दर्शन को सार्थक कर पाएंगे। दीनदयाल उपाध्याय जी भी यही कहते थे।
Pandit Deen Dayal Upadhyay gave the ideals of Ekatma Manavvad or integral humanism and Antyodaya or progress for the poorest and weakest sections of society. BJP observes his death anniversary as Samarpan Divas each year. With Meghna Dev, News Night Desk, DD India.
Shifting focus to search operations in Uttarakhand, where search for workers missing in a flooded tunnel after a part of a remote Himalayan glacier broke away entered fourth day on Thursday. Rescuers raced to free around 35 Indian construction workers who were missing since the disaster happened. The death toll from the disaster has reached 35 so far. Over 172 persons remained unaccounted for since Sunday's disaster in Uttarakhand. Most of them workers at the Tapovan hydroelectric project, Vishnugad hydroelectric project, and at the smaller Rishi Ganga dam, which was swept away by the torrent. Rescuers were focusing on saving people stuck in flooded tunnel connected to the 520 megawatt Tapovan project, deploying heavy excavators to remove water and slush. Union Home Minister Amit Shah held several rallies in West Bengal on Thursday. The Home Minister launched the fourth phase of the Paribortan Yatra from Rashmela ground in Cooch Behar, launching a scathing attack on West Bengal Chief Minister Mamata Banerjee and her nephew Abhishek Banerjee. Amit Shah said the BJP's Parivartan Yatra in the state was aimed at ending corruption by Bua Bhatija. Attending a rally at Matua in the poll-bound state of West Bengal, Shah said the opposition is misleading the minorities on CAA and assured that the law would not impact the citizenship status of Indian minorities. Earlier in the day, Union Education Minister Dr. Ramesh Pokhriyal Nishank, Union Textile Minister Smriti Irani and Union Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal on Thursday jointly launched the website of India Toy Fair. Now, this event was live streamed on internet. The toy makers, innovators and students can actually register to participate in this online event. Others can also attend the virtual tours of exhibition, craft exhibition, various toy making skills by the participating innovators and take part in series of online competitions and quizzes. In fact, various Indian Institute of Technology, that is IIT, and National Institute of Technology, that is NIT, and other esteemed technical colleges across the country are also collaborating with the event.
Acting upon the clarion call made by Prime Minister Narendra Modi for coordinated efforts to boost toy manufacturing in India and to improve its global market share in line with the theme of Atmanirbhar Bharat and get vocal for local campaigns, the first India Toy Fair 2021, a first-of-its-kind initiative that brings together all stakeholders of the Indian toy industry to create sustainable linkages and promote dialogue for the holistic development of the industry. The website of India Toy Fair 2021, www.iitoy.in. The indiatoyfair.in was launched in New Delhi.
हमारे लघु उद्योग, कुटीर उद्योग और विशेषतः ट्रेडिशनल हैंडक्राफ्टेड टॉयज के हमारे शिल्पकारों को आपका समर्थन प्राप्त होगा। इसी दृष्टि से आज इंडिया टॉय फेयर 2021 की रजिस्ट्रेशन में आप सब सहभागी होंगे।
जो नई शिक्षा नीति हम लेके आई हैं, वो भारत में आमूल-चूल परिवर्तन की दिशा में, नए भारत के निर्माण की दिशा में लाए हैं, जो नेशनल भी है, इंटरनेशनल भी है, इम्पैक्टफुल भी है, इंटरैक्टिव भी है।
आखिर बच्चे जब यंग एज में डेवलप करते हैं अपने अलग अलग स्किल्स, उसमें टॉयज का एक बहुत प्रमुख योगदान रहता है।
A 4-day virtual event, the India Toy Fair 2021 is being held from 27th February to 2nd March this year. Girish Nishana's report for DD India.
And with that, it's time to wrap up this edition of News Night. We'll be back tomorrow, same time on DD India. Stay with us. Namaskar.